I'm Linda, and this Machine Minute is brought to you by Baby Lock and the Crescendo Machine. Today I'm going to show you how to do no-waste flying geese. So flying geese is a traditional pattern where it's a rectangular block that is twice as long as it is tall. So we're going to show you how to do this by cutting some squares, no triangles. So let's get started. So to make 4 flying geese blocks in one process, the first thing you need to know is how large your finished block is going to be. Again, this is that large section, which would be theoretically the geese, and this is the sky. So whatever your finished width and your finished height are going to determine what size you cut your squares. So to make these no-waste flying geese blocks, 4 of them at a time, you're going to cut a square from your main fabric, so that's the one you want in this space, that's 1.25 inches larger than the desired finished width. So in my case, since my finished block is going to measure 3 inches wide, I'm going to cut my large square for this space 4.25 inches. Then I'm going to cut my small squares. Now the small squares are going to be using the height of the block, and I add 7/8 of an inch to the height of the finished block to cut my squares. So in my case, again, my height is 1.5 inches, so I'm going to cut those smaller squares at 2 3/8 inches, which is 7/8 of an inch larger. So you're cutting 1 of your large blocks and 4 of your small blocks. You'll see now that I've marked 3 of those small blocks, and that's my first step, is to mark those diagonally from corner to corner. I'm going to show you how to mark diagonally in case you've never done this before. I just grab any ruler. I like to use a smaller one because it's a little easier on these smaller blocks. I want to position the ruler so that I'm just to the edge of that corner diagonally. So I'm a little off here because I want to make room for my pencil lead. Hold it down and gently draw. You don't want to pull hard across because you're going across the bias of the fabric, and that's where the most stretch is. So you want to just very gently mark that line. The next thing we're going to do is position our 2 squares on our 2 smaller squares on the large block. And you're going to position them so that diagonal line, obviously so the corners are even, but that diagonal line is going to go continuously across the block. Now we're going to sew 1/4 inch to each side of that line. I've set my needle width at 1/4 inch. I'm going to start sewing with that line that I've marked just under my presser foot. So I've sewn one side. I've got the knee lift on my machine so I can lift the foot and press it down again. It's so handy when I'm doing piecing like this. I'm going to keep sewing down the other side. Again, keeping that 1/4 inch to each side of the drawn line. So you can see now that I've got the 2 lines of stitching and my pencil line. I'm going to come in with my ruler on my rotary cutting mat, and I'm going to cut along that line. And I'm going to press back those small triangles. The seam allowance is going to go toward the smaller triangles. I'm going to press. Okay, so now we've got our 3rd square that we've marked, and we're going to set it on our oddly shaped piece. Kind of looks, if you look at it a little bit, it kind of looks like a heart, upside down heart. So you're going to set it on there, and you'll see that you're in the right place because you want to make sure you're kind of evenly spaced between the two peaks that you've sewn on. You're going to pin that in place. I worry more about making sure the seam allowance stays put. So I make sure I've got a pin there holding that seam allowance in place. And then another one at the other end. And then again, we're going to sew in the same fashion that we did before to a 1/4 inch from one side of the line and then a 1/4 inch to the other side of the line. So now we've sewn to both sides of the line. Again, I'm going to cut on that line. With my rotary cutter, or you can use scissors. And then I'm going to press back that second piece. I'm just going to finger press it so you can see here. What you end up with is a flying geese block. Now, in this case, I've just trimmed off the little dogtails and trimmed it up nicely. One thing to keep in mind as you're doing this, if you're the kind of person who likes to cut your pieces larger, you want to make sure that this corner is, the seam comes right out to the edge of that corner, and that you have a 1/4 inch from this point to your fabric edge. So if you're going to trim it up later, instead of making it the exact size, those are the things to bear in mind. Once you go through this process and do this with all the parts, you'll end up with 4 flying geese with no waste and trimmed away fabric, and you'll be ready to go with your project.